First of all, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about whether psychokinesis is real. Psychokinesis or telekinesis is the ability to influence objects with psychic power. If you don't think it's real, I would encourage you to read the first and last sentences of this excerpt from a document posted on the CIA's website. It is about a scientific experiment involving psychokinesis that was done in Japan. This video not only explains how to influence matter with your mind from a practical level, but it also explains why this is possible. The point of spoon bending is not just a creative way to ruin silverware, it's both a foundational skill and an immediate way of getting feedback about your use of psychokinesis. When I say that spoon bending is a foundational skill, I mean that it's something that can be learned with relative ease, and that this basic ability can serve as a foundation for other kinds of psychic skills that require you to influence matter with your mind. Jack Houck explained that silverware bending was just to let us know that we can influence the world and that we should apply our minds in this manner towards a useful goal in our lives. The part about immediate feedback is important, because if you are trying to learn a psychic ability through trial and error without any immediate feedback, it is much harder. In my previous video about how the paranormal is related to quantum mechanics, I explained the underlying mechanism that allows the mind to influence matter. Consciousness is a quantum effect. Quantum mechanics are the foundation that everything in the universe is built on, and therefore we can use our consciousness to influence things at the most fundamental level. I provided sources for all the information that I used to come to this conclusion in the previous video. Understanding the mechanics of how something works is different than knowing how to do it yourself, though. You can know the mechanics of how to make a hole-in-one, but very few people can do that on their first try. So using will to influence the world requires more than just a mechanical understanding. Practically speaking, just your intent to do something is not always enough. You need to have practice and a kind of deeper understanding to get good at this. One of the common things that people do to practice telekinesis is bend spoons with their mind. What actually takes place for a beginner is that your mind interacts with the spoon becomes softer, and typically gets hot. Then you can tell that the spoon is getting ready when it gets softer, and then you can use gentle pressure to bend it. This is an accurate technical description, but a technical description doesn't help you understand how to practically do it. At a practical level, you have to overcome your belief that the spoon is a solid object, and by doing this, the spoon is no longer a solid object, just as long as you hold that thought with enough certainty. I didn't truly understand this until I watched Bonita Wood's video about spoon bending. I can't emphasize this point enough. The major barrier that you have to overcome is the belief that you can't do such a thing. There are different ways for people to visualize or conceptualize how to use their mind to weaken or bend a spoon. The underlying mechanism and effect is always the same no matter what visualization technique we use. Some people like to say that they use chi or energy from their chakras to bend the spoon. You don't need to believe in or understand chakras or chi in order to get good results. There is no belief system or occult practice that holds a monopoly on telekinesis, and you don't need to ask an external being for permission or power to use telekinesis. So you can give yourself permission to use whatever kind of visualization technique you like, because the visualization itself is just a tool that we use to achieve a goal. Since we understand visualization is just a tool, this understanding is helpful for people who are not very visual and have a hard time trying to use complex visualization techniques to get results. Giving yourself permission is an excellent way to think of spoon bending, because you always had the ability, but it is not until you truly give yourself permission to use that ability that it will actually work. There is an interesting story that I am showing you about Nicole Mary. She was teaching children how to bend spoons. Some of the children didn't have their spoons bend, so she asked them to ask God why their spoons didn't bend. Children don't like complexity, so they just decided to ask God to make their spoons bend. Consequently, their spoons started to bend. I didn't mention this to get bogged down in a religious discussion, but rather as a demonstration that we sometimes have the illusion that we need permission to do spoon bending. Now, I want to illustrate the point that you personally can also bend spoons with your mind. Michael Shermer is a skeptic who went to a spoon bending party. He was given a large spoon that he could not bend with his regular strength. However, he reached a point where everyone around him was chanting "bend," and then he bent the bowl of a spoon, which is the strongest point. He doesn't let himself entertain the possibility of the paranormal, so he concluded that this was just adrenaline. This is very interesting because technically it is an example that you don't need to believe in the paranormal to use it. All he needed to do was to believe that he could really bend the spoon. Jack Houck is the person who really popularized spoon bending parties. These events were all about teaching people how to bend spoons, and they were chaotic and exciting for a reason. To make spoon bending easier for people to learn, you get a lot of people who are enthusiastic, emotionally invested, and focused as a group towards the common goal of bending spoons. This is a psychological technique because the only thing that is really holding people back is psychology. The best way that he used to get people all focused on the same goal is to get everyone shouting "bend" repeatedly. Obviously, the words themselves are not what bends the spoon, but it's the focused intent of multiple people that undermines the psychological barriers that we have. Jack's method technically had 4 steps: get people to mentally connect with their spoons, get people to enthusiastically shout "bend," release the thought of bending the spoon into the spoon itself, and finally, whenever someone succeeds in bending a spoon, you want to have them celebrate and shout to let the other people know. This technique was pretty good because most of the people who went to these spoon bending parties had success. Part of the success came from what Jack called a peak emotional event. The idea being that creating a very emotional event overcomes your inhibitions and allows you to access the abilities that your inhibitions were blocking. Now that we've got some of the basics of the spoon bending party down, we can add further tips. Sean McNamara has a video on YouTube where he hosted a spoon bending party. Once most of the people had success bending their spoons, he told them to put their spoons down and gather around in small groups to help the people who hadn't bent their spoons yet. Having the successful people move their attention and focus towards the unsuccessful people creates a more personal environment, especially if you get them to share their names first. Then we create a sort of group cohesion at a more personal level by having everyone in the small group shout "bend" together. He also makes a comment about how he does a group exercise where he has a whole group of people try to move a piece of tinfoil with psychokinesis. Half of the groups tend to succeed, and the other half of the groups tend to not have any success. He states that there is something about the shared energy there that's not quite right, and he doesn't know the solution how to fix the energy. It's my theory that if we have a better group cohesion, that group will do better at psychokinetic tasks. So ideally, we would first get the group into a flow state by having them cooperate together at a physical task that requires coordination. Then when the time comes for the psychokinetic task, we get them to physically link by placing their hands on each other's shoulders, or we get them to psychologically link by getting them all to hold onto a rope together. There is a video on YouTube of a group of Buddhist monks who psychologically linked themselves together with a rope, and by chanting together, the water that they were blessing began to move as a result of their combined intent. I've read a book about glossolalia, which is probably more commonly known as speaking in tongues, that was written from an anthropological perspective. The methods that are used to teach someone how to practice glossolalia seems to translate to spoon bending. For example, a greater intensity of effort and energy means a greater chance of success for both glossolalia and for spoon bending. Likewise, there is a physical arrangement aspect as well. If the successful spoon benders or glossolialists are dispersed and not concentrated, it appears that their ability to positively influence the unsuccessful people are reduced. My thoughts are that once a significant amount of people have successfully bent spoons, we should concentrate them together around a single unsuccessful person and have their focus their intention towards that one person's goal of bending the spoon. This is approximately what happened when the skeptic Michael Shermer successfully bent his spoon. We know why there are such similarities between glossolalia and spoon bending too. They are both altered states of consciousness that we must overcome psychological barriers to achieve. Lloyd Auerbach explains that the state of mind for spoon bending is a detached, very light altered state, where it seems like your hands are doing the bending without your thinking about the action. You are obviously in control of your hands. It's just that when you get out of your own way and stop actively thinking about what you are doing, you are capable of incredible things. The phrase about getting out of your own way is very important. Jack Houck uses a different phrase to convey the same idea. He calls it letting go. Jack points out that when people stop concentrating on the fork, that's when it starts to bend. Lloyd Auerbach also talks about this idea. He points out that many movies portray telekinesis as something that requires intense effort and concentration. This is not what is required for most people in real-life telekinesis, though. Rather, it's when you stop concentrating that you start to have success. I would also say, as an interesting side note, that some people who have demonstrated psychokinesis, like the famous Nina Kulagina, did use significant effort in the process. So the idea of getting out of your own way and letting go is actually taking your conscious mind more or less out of the equation. I'm showing you a quote from a book that explains how the amount of information processing in the brain associated with will and consequently our direct psychic intent is pretty limited. It goes on to explain that this limitation of brain processing associated with will corresponds with the average overall results of people using their will to influence random number generators. This was a book about science, yet it didn't put much emphasis on giving citations and sources for all of the things that it mentioned. So while this information is almost certainly true, I haven't been able to personally verify it yet by looking at the primary sources. Jack Houck also explains that the optimum size for a PK or psychokinesis party is between 15 and 40 people. Likewise, Lloyd states that you should have at least 5 or 6 people as a rough minimum, and you really want to have people who believe in psychokinesis and personally want it to happen. Since at its core this is a psychological barrier that we are overcoming, it is likely a sort of group mentality that we can unlock when we have enough people. Playing music is done both at glossolalia events and at spoon-bending events. The exact genre of music is not really important as long as it adds to the atmosphere of positive excitement successfully. So you want happy, upbeat music. If you can find ahead of time what kind of genre or bands the people who will be at the party like, that is very good. If each of the people has favorite songs that are upbeat and exciting, you can make a playlist based on that. Another point that I want to emphasize is that for roughly 50% of people who go to a spoon-bending party, they have successfully convinced their subconscious mind that this sort of thing really is possible. Because of this, they can now spoon-bend at will. It is likely that the other 50% of people can also achieve this level of skill if they continue going to spoon-bending parties. I want to talk a bit more about the results. Using your mind to soften the metal of a spoon that you could just bend with regular strength is referred to as kindergarten bending by Jack Houck. When you have something that is simply impossible to bend with regular human strength, yet you bent it anyway, that is what he calls high school bending. When you get really good at using your mind, you don't need to use both hands to bend the spoon. You can hold it in just one hand, and the spoon will fall under its own weight as it softens. Finally, there have been various experiments done to study the influence of the human mind over random number generators. The people who were more successful at influencing these reported that they felt a sort of resonance or sort of feeling at one with the random number generator. Another key factor was a concept of effortless striving. This is a paradoxical feeling of overwhelming desire for something, but not a brute force intent to get the goal. You feel like you can achieve the goal with no effort because there was never any resistance to begin with. Resistance was simply an illusion.